All right, this one's going to be kind of scattered and strange. Not that they aren't all scattered and strange. So I was having a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine, Count Dracula, and we were talking about the Genesis story. And if you're not familiar with the Genesis story, I think most people are, but as it goes, God had created paradise. God had created man and woman and instructed them that they were not to consume the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that a serpent advised Eve that eating of the tree was actually okay, and that it was being that knowledge was being deliberately hidden from them by God. And so whether this is metaphor or a factual historical depiction of what happened, I think is irrelevant. I like to think of it as metaphor. I think it's easier to discuss with people in that way. So that knowledge, it made me think of one of the dialogues that Plato produced about Socrates and I think Menes, who was a sophist, and they were discussing the source of knowledge and whether anything is true, and how we would determine whether it was true. And so in order to demonstrate that things are true, whether we accept them as true or we can prove that they're true, some things just are. So Socrates asks for permission to interrogate one of Menes' slaves, and he calls this slave boy over and starts to have a conversation with him, questioning him through the Socratic method to find out what the boy knew. So he learns that the boy is illiterate, as can be expected of a slave. He obviously does not understand mathematics, knows basic numbers. He can count, but can't do much more than that. So by drawing in the sand, I'll condense this, by drawing a rectilinear triangle in the sand at the boy's feet, and explaining basically that Pythagorean theorem. And within a brief period of time, he demonstrates that the boy understands the Pythagorean theorem, yet he doesn't understand mathematics. He doesn't know mathematics. He doesn't know how to read. He's never been taught these things, and yet the moment it's presented to him, he knows. And that the Pythagorean theorem is not something that exists because we can look at it. It's an abstraction. The hypotenuse of a rectilinear triangle is always going to be the sum of the other two sides squared. It's always going to be that way, and it's not a triangle that you can hold. Basically, it's a plane. It's an abstraction in space. So this young man, though he couldn't read, couldn't add, couldn't write, is able to understand a mathematical theorem. And so what he's trying to demonstrate is that knowledge is not something that's imparted. Knowledge is not something that is sought out. Knowledge is something that it's recalled. And so when that knowledge is recalled, it's not something that's being pushed into you, not something that you're being indoctrinated with, but something that is revealed to you, that is true. And you've not only do you know it's true, you've always known it was true, and that knowledge is you're remembering the truth of that knowledge, so to speak. And so, how did I get started on this? Oh, the Genesis story. So, our concept of right and wrong. How do we know what's right? How do we know what's wrong? Good, evil. How do we discern between those two? And what Dracula and I were going back and forth about is whether it's something that is already within us to understand the difference between good and evil, or if that's something that was imparted. And what I'm inclined to believe, and what makes sense to me, is that knowledge is already within you. And I think going through the semantics of the origin of where that happened, whether it's God that imparted that into us, or if that's something that was revealed at the moment we experienced that feeling, or as our brains evolved, working with other people in communal groups and stuff like that, behaviors that were rewarded were behaviors that were good, and vice versa. Good behaviors are rewarded within a community. So the idea of consuming that fruit and having now the knowledge of good and evil, that the scales fall from your eyes, and you now see that you're naked, and you see that you're flawed. You understand. You have knowledge now, whereas you didn't have it before. I don't. If that's a metaphor, what is it a metaphor of? Is that just an evolutionary mechanism? Was it something that was literally consumed, and then bang, our brains are changed forever, and now every subsequent generation recalls that knowledge that we recalled upon consuming that fruit? I understand this is this scattered and crazy nonsense talk. So if that slave boy is able to understand Pythagorean theorem, and it's not that just he can retell it, but he gets it. He understands why Pythagorean theorem is, why all such rectilinear triangles follow the same law, because it's law. That knowledge wasn't revealed. He knew it and recalled it. So the capacity we have to judge good and evil, to discern between the two, I think is something that is built in. And I think the cultural influence enables us to use our rational mind, the intuitive mind versus the rational mind. Our culture enables us to override that circuitry and say that though the gut feeling, the soul feeling, the heart feeling, whatever you want to call it, we have the ability to override that feeling. We have the ability to, quote, sin against the better aspects of ourselves. Meaning, if we know that something is wrong, we have the ability, the free will, the choice. We're presented with that opportunity to know the difference between good and evil, and still have the choice to pursue whichever we decide. So cultural influences can override that circuitry and make us engage in behaviors that we know are wrong. And I think Jordan Peterson, that new book, he's 12 Rules for Life, the new book he's got out, sort of links the ideas from maps of meaning into that idea, sort of an instruction manual for how to be the best version of yourself. And in order to do that, you need to construct an idealized version of yourself, your own hero archetype, the sum of all heroes. If you can create a superhero, an archetype, so for the biblical stories, that's Christ, someone who is just the right amount of brave, and he's just the right amount of strong, and he's just the right amount of intelligent and kind and wise and compassionate and sympathetic and all of those things. You're riding the line between yin and yang of compassion. So not so compassion that people can take advantage of you, but not so incompassionate, I don't think is a word, but you get my point. Not so incompassionate, man, that pisses me off. Not not compassionate, whatever that is. So you're riding that line, and that's when you're doing that across the sum of all virtues. That is the archetype. That is the superhero. So your ability to form a superhero version of yourself that you'll never get to, and yet acting in such a way as to try and achieve that standard, I think that's the message in those biblical stories. I think that's the message in all stories. He uses Pinocchio as an example. Every time Pinocchio is separate from his conscience, he deviates from his conscience, he gets into trouble, he gets thrown into chaos. He has to go and rescue the benevolent aspects of himself that were imparted from his father in the depths of the ocean. So every time we, to use that word again, sin against our conscience, we're thrown into chaos, and we have to re-emerge from that chaos and hopefully take with us now the information that each time we deviate from that line between chaos and order, we're going to be thrown into chaos, or we are going to be, it's going to further perpetuate order in our lives. So that the message that he's trying to push across in that 12 Rules for Life book is that create an idealized version of yourself and stop doing things that steer you away from that idealized standard. It's the biblical story, it's the nursery rhyme story, it's the Disney movie story, it's the story in Harry Potter. It's always the same story across all of these different dimensions. What is virtuous? Okay, grab it. Now compile all virtue and mold it into an idealized, virtuous being. That being is the standard. You'll never reach it, but don't stop trying. Don't stop trying to achieve that standard that you set for yourself. And the knowledge that fruit imparted, or that was evolved in our minds, or that community sort of reinforced, the knowledge of the difference between good and evil is free will. That is our capacity to choose to be the idealized version of ourselves, or to be the evil, the inverse, whatever the inverse of virtue is. We can choose to be one or the other. We can choose to remain in chaos, or we can remain in order. But you're never going... The reason the snake is in the garden is because there is always a little bit of chaos in the ordered system. You can't get rid of all of the chaos, or the system collapses. And you can't get all of the order out of chaos, or the system collapses. That yin and yang. In the white field, the yin, there's a little bit of chaos. And in the black field, the yang, there's a little bit of order. And they're in perfect balance. So that's the message. That seems to be the answer for how to be and why to be that way. Each time you're confronted with a choice, you're moving from point A to point B. You act in a way that you think is going to get you to point B, and you get there. Fantastic. Do that again, and again, and again, and again, and again. You're winning across the sum of all games. Or you're trying to get from point A to point B. You're in one place. You deviate from the path to B, and now you're in chaos. You're in a completely different place, and you're a completely different person now, with a new point A and a new point B. And you can continue to deviate and continue to deviate, and over and over and over, and remain in chaos. And the way Dr. Peterson describes that chaos, that is hell. That is your personal hell that you've constructed for yourself. It's the worst possible outcome, because only you know what the worst possible outcome is for you. So you create heaven, you create hell. These are abstractions. These aren't. It's encoded in fairy tales, and it's encoded in movies, and it's encoded in the Bible, and it's encoded in the way we set our rules for life. That this is what you need to be doing. This is what you should be doing. This is what's true. And you're the only one stopping you from staying from being a part of the light side of the force. You can go with the dark side or you can go with the light side. They're both rewarding. Excuse me, but one is infinitely more rewarding and creates an infinite fractal of benefit out from you at the center of that ordered system. All right, like I said, ultra chaotic thinking out loud. So hopefully that was helpful for someone somewhere. It helps me articulate the ideas. Thanks. Sonny, Melissa, I see you. Take it easy, guys. Have a good day.